1955's Swamp Women, also known as Swamp Diamonds, is a women in prison chain gang flick that I honestly didn't expect to watch this season. You see, originally I'd been approached by a filmmaker who'd asked if I was interested in covering their movie back in May. But in mid-September I got an email from them basically saying that plans had changed and that they couldn't provide me with a review copy anymore, which meant I had a hole in my schedule that I needed to fill fast. After feeling pretty uninspired by what was in my to-watch pile, I wanted to avoid similar stuff to what I'd already covered this season. I basically somewhat frustratedly asked my partner to thumb through some of my 50 movie mega packs and send me any titles that caught her eye. And, after seeing the title for this one, she initially misread it as Swamp Woman and thought it was going to be some kind of stinky femme creature feature. She threw it my way and apologised in advance. Initial research on this wasn't exactly promising. The film was featured in the book The 50 Worst Films of All Time and How They Got That Way, and around the same time I also found out it had featured in an episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000, so consider my confidence thoroughly knocked. But you know what? Having gone through it and come out the other side, I feel pretty confident in saying that it's not that bad. It's basically a 30-minute movie padded out to an hour and 10 minutes-ish, but I'd say it's at least somewhat entertaining, in a campy 50s way. The film opens at a carnival as we meet Bob and Marie. Bob is big in the oil game and looking to invest in a ton of local swampland to drill for oil, and Marie, while not tied to Bob, is basically looking to drill something of her own, if you catch my drift. Anyway, the pair are enjoying the carnival, and in a bit of an info-dumpy opening, we find out that Bob's heading over to some swamplands the next day to scope it out. And Marie asks if she can go, and after a bit of back and forthing, Bob agrees. The pair then get accosted by a huckster looking to make a few clams. He nearly gets away with it, but's caught by a cop who takes him to a station, and it's at this point that we meet Lee, a policewoman ahead of her field who's about to be placed on a special assignment. She's to go undercover as a prisoner and infiltrate the NATO gang. Originally a gang of 3 men and women, her job is to cozy up to the ladies of the gang, win their trust, and then have the women lead her to the swamplands to reclaim the spoils of a diamond heist that got them locked away. The guards will facilitate the breakout and closely monitor the situation, and as soon as the diamonds have been recovered, wham! The police will jump in, arrest the women, they can go back to prison on longer sentences, and Lee gets, well, I'm not really sure what Lee gets. Job satisfaction, maybe? Who knows? Anyway, the plan gets set in motion, and Lee is quickly able to persuade the girls to attempt a break, and, obviously, they're successful. After evading the police, they head out towards the swamplands and stop off-screen, to get some civilian clothes, freshen up, and grab a boat to head out into the swamps. It's at this point that we're reintroduced then to Bob and Marie, who are touring the swamplands and having a generally quite lovely time. That is, until they come across our cons who've ended up marooned after the boat provided to them was found to have holes in it. That isn't a problem though, because as soon as Bob gets anywhere near them, they basically commandeer his boat and take both him and Marie hostage. And what follows for the next 30 to 40 minutes is basically just a travelogue, with the women all sniping, fighting and calling each other out, Lee trying to gently stop them all from killing each other, and Marie ends up being cooked on multiple occasions as all the women in turn try to run train on Bob, who really doesn't seem to mind that much. In a 70-minute movie that features rubbish crocodile attacks, shootouts, and more fast-talking 50s slang than you can shake a stick at, will Lee manage to get the women to the diamonds in one piece? Will the cons catch on that they're the ones being conned? And just how much sex will Bob make his no-strings, not girlfriend who is actually kinda sort of his girlfriend sit through? All this and more will be answered if you check out Swamp Women. So, the first thing you need to be aware of with this movie is that it is essentially just a 30-minute story padded out to an hour and 10. The pacing's completely to the wall. They basically spend the opening 10 to 15 minutes setting up the premise, and about 30 to 40 minutes travelling, arguing and fighting between themselves over who gets to see Bob's swampland. And the finale is about 10 minutes or so long and ends about as predictably as these films can end. But the plot isn't why you're coming to this film, because frankly, it's way too overlong and begins to get boring after about 20 minutes. I don't need to see 4 women push a boat up a swamp for just under 3/4 of an hour and then spend 20 minutes pushing the boat back down the swamp. What I do like about this film is its total campiness, and there is a lot of butch campiness on display here. Its total disregard for the audience and its patience, like, if it wants to have a 10-minute scene where Vera and Billy argue over who's the biggest tramp for wanting to fuck Bob, then it's going to have a 10-minute scene where Vera and Billy argue over who's the biggest tramp for wanting to fuck Bob. And its characters, which are just written so unlike anything I've seen on Earth up to this point. None of them react even remotely how normal people would react in any situation like this. Everything's just got this somewhat dreamy quality to it. While it's absolutely and totally unnecessarily padded, I didn't particularly mind the padding so much because the dialogue and actions of the characters just made it such a bizarre watch that barring a bit of a draggy second act where things kind of settle in, I was pretty much on board for most of it. The act structuring is bizarrely about right. The first act's a bit truncated, the second act is a bit overly long, and the third act is about right in terms of pacing and balance. Although this film does have a habit of creating pointless but entertaining scenes just to help add an extra 5 minutes to proceedings. The pacing within those acts, though? Honestly, it's awful, with no real consideration to how a story should flow in favour of instead just desperately trying to get it over the 70-ish minute line, which it just barely manages to do. I feel like I'm going to be on my own with this one, but while I absolutely acknowledge that this isn't a good script, I can't deny that I found it to be a fun script, both to watch and to take the piss out of. This movie was written by David Stern. He has 9 writing credits, 6 of which are for a film series led by a titular character, Francis. Swamp Woman was his last non-Francis based movie, and his last writing credit was in 1956. He died in 2003 at the age of 94. The film was directed by Roger Cormans, and of his 56 directing credits, this was his 5th ever feature. Now, we covered off Cormans as recently as my review of The Pit and the Pendulum, but his prominence as a director seems to be predominantly based in the 50s and 60s, with a shift to a more producing-based role taking over for much of the 70s onwards. And on the direction front, it's not awful. In fact, I'd say it was fine to good. While I do have some gripes around his location work, I personally feel he could have done way more to really help bring the swamp alive. Instead, all we really get are some POV shots of trees passing by and a couple of underwater shots. For the most part, it's functional. It has a bit of a rough and ready feel to it in places, and it does swap to a more handheld approach later on, which I quite liked. It's not Corman's best here, but it's far from his worst, and it's far from the worst. It does what it sets out to do, and then it wraps things up. Little muss, little fuss. I came to this movie with low expectations, and it somewhat surprised me. I think if someone came to this expecting standards, they may be disappointed. Now, the Cine, that's not so great, and this is easily not Fred West's best work. No, not that one. I hope. Composition is a bit all over the place, there's not really much in the way of experimentation, and some scenes I really feel like what was in the storyboards and shot lists weren't really realised in the footage itself. It can quite frequently end up as a bleary set of sequences where I had to rewind and rewatch just to see exactly what was happening in a scene, which is never a good sign. I'd say generally scene structure gets a pass in the sense that they use a variety of shot types to help craft the story, but I do think in some places they could have gone a bit less. Action scenes seem to go way overboard on the cuts, while more subtle scenes are left high and dry with more shots needed. And in a way, the film kind of cheats really, as some of the nicer looking scenes are largely made up of archive footage. In that regard, the Cine is probably the worst element of this film. On the performance front, we are smouldering. Seriously, this film is one of the horniest movies I've seen in a good while, and that's saying something. With Mike Connors as Bob, Jill Jarmin as Billy, and Carol Matthews as Lee giving performances that are, well, smouldering. Well, maybe smouldering isn't the right word. Heated through. Seriously, I'm amazed this didn't turn into a porno. There was just that many wanton looks being shot about throughout the production. This was one of a string of 5 films Corman would work on featuring Beverly Garland, who plays Vera, who, when she isn't threatening to kill everyone on a regular basis, is threatening to fuck and kill Bob almost as much. Mary Windsor as Josie is also absolutely fab. She's fast-talking, snipey, but has a cool exterior. She feels like the kind of woman who could destroy your entire life with a couple of sentences and then light a cigarette, slide some shades on and sashay away. The performance here is just awesome. Most of the rest of the cast are horny, but fine. Susan Cummings as Marie is a little bit of a drag. Basically, she spends the first 10 minutes being a somewhat airheaded, love-struck puppy, and once the cons catch up to her, she spends the rest of the film getting in the way, crying, and having to watch as Bob attempts to fuck all the convicts in front of her, which can get a bit grating. Equally, the worst performance has to be Lou Place as the police captain, who gives Lee a mission and turns up a few times in this movie. The framing on him is always atrocious, and for the most part he delivers his lines just like he's learnt the ability to read for the first time right before they said action. He gave me real Dean Lerner from Dark Place vibes. He's simply dreadful. Finally, the soundtrack. It fits the film just fine. It's an orchestral score predominantly, nothing feels out of place particularly, but if I had to pick fault with it, I'd say at times it can begin to sound a little bit stocky at times. Like, there are some scenes where you really just feel like an editor had been sat at his desk at 3 o'clock in the morning, watching the scene back for the 125th time, thinking, this doesn't feel right, I'll just see what's in the royalty-free score bin. For the most part, it's functional, but at times it just feels a bit bland. Swamp Women was released in theatres in 1955 or 1956. I have conflicting reports as to exactly when the actual premiere took place. What I do know is that by the time the home video market had arrived, the film either hadn't been properly copyrighted or had never been copyrighted in the first place, because by the 80s it was in the public domain, and continues to be so to this day. My version came from the Mill Creek Treeline Films 50 Horror Classics collection, which was released on DVD in 2004. But looking online, it's been a regular title in amongst various other public domain sets and compilation box sets of Girls Gone Bad style movies. So you'll probably be able to find a copy incredibly easily. Hell, a quick search on YouTube found a higher quality version of the film than the copy I had to work with for this review. So while it's sort of out of print, I guess, there are options. Swamp Women is the furthest from an essential watch as you can get. Honestly, there's almost no reason to watch this film outside of some kind of Roger Corman-esque marathon challenge. It has functional direction, stocky scoring, poor cine, and a script that feels like a good movie fell into a blender. That being said, at only 70-ish minutes long, I found it surprisingly entertaining, if not totally pointless. It's daft, silly, doesn't go anywhere, you know within 10 minutes exactly how the whole film's going to go down, but the joy in this movie is the incredibly pointless journey with which these pastiches of 1950s Americans go on. It's the characters who are just next level crazy. It's the whole vibe the film gives off. This film is absolutely unnecessary, pointless, and some might say dull. But if you just want a dumb, stupid way to kill 70 minutes, you could do worse, and the MST Rift version is much more palatable if you don't have time for padded nonsense. I won't recommend this one, but I will slide it silently under the table to any of you trash fiends looking for a campy fix.